What is going on, guys, and welcome to the channel. This episode we're going to be diving deep into the fuel system for the F100 build. I have Andrew here, our master tech at Salvage to Savage. He's going to be kind of breaking down the AN lines, how we are going to be laying out the fuel system for the Ford. So Andrew, how's it going, buddy?
It's going good.
We have a lot of AN lines. What are AN lines? Like what is this stuff?
The Army Navy fittings are used as a universal fitting to move fluids in aircrafts and automotive. They're great for leak-proof connections and high flow.
We got our shiny stainless steel fuel tank. So let's start from the back and work our way forward. What's our game plan with setting this up?
So on the suction side of the pump, we're gonna have a -8 line coming to...
That's this guy right here?
Yep, out of the bottom of the stainless tank here, and run into an aeromotive fuel pump. It's gonna mount right next to the fuel tank. And then on the pressure side of the pump, it's gonna switch into a -6 line all the way up to the front of the chassis. We're gonna mount a fuel filter located here, and then run our line up to our fuel rails over here.
Anything to add, Mike?
Hi.
So we have two fuel rails here that come with the Whipple kit. We're upping the injector size to accommodate for the boost, right?
Yes.
So with that, you have to increase your fuel pressure. You have to make sure that you have enough fuel so that the air fuel mixture is stoich and basically everything jives and we're not running into a lean issue. We're gonna link these two fuel rails together with the AN line so we have equal fuel pressure across all the injectors. We're either gonna cap it or we're gonna put our fuel pressure regulator to be able to equalize the pressure in these rails so the injectors don't get thirsty. I think. That's the plan.
That's the plan.
That's the plan. So for you guys at home who have never messed around with AN lines, this is the episode for you because Andrew is gonna show you how to cut, fit, and make your very own
plug. That's the plug.
AN lines. Let's get to work, Andrew.
Let's go.
All right, we're starting our fuel system back here. So we got this 1/2" MPT 90 to a -8. We wanted to try to keep it as tight as we could to the gas tank so that this line doesn't come like swooping out. So from here, we're gonna go take our -8 and we're gonna run it up to our fuel pumps. Kind of get this mocked in place. And then Andrew's gonna go ahead and grab the lines and start taking measurements so we know where to cut.
Here we have our AN fitting. That's gonna be the outlet out of our fuel tank. What you need to install these fittings are a set of aluminum soft jaws so you can clamp your aluminum fitting without marring the finish or damaging it. The first thing you have to do is lubricate the hose and the fitting so that you make sure it can slide on without too much resistance. And then the tricky part is making sure that the hose doesn't back out as you're tightening it down. For anybody who's doing this who doesn't have the expensive aluminum AN wrenches, you could use a little bit of tape on a set of crescent wrench or whatever type of jawed wrench you have to keep it from scratching the aluminum or rounding out the edges. Now the AN fitting is wedged into the hose and clamped on with the collar, and it's ready to attach to the fuel tank.
This is your starting point. Now you can take this line and just pretty much run it around and get your next length, cut it, and then we'll just repeat the process.
That's correct.
And we're gonna do that 1,000,000 times. Smile! Yay!
We're making our first connection here. Route it. I think we're gonna route the hose in between the mount for the fuel tank here, and our fuel pump is gonna be located right in this area. It's looking good. We are gonna measure the length of hose, pull it back out, and complete the other end and get this mocked up. So we're using a pair of hose cutters, and we use some tape to kind of minimize the amount of fray that you're gonna get from the nylon and the wire braiding inside of the hose. Now we have our hose length cut to the appropriate size.
So fuel tank, the fuel pump. Now we just have to repeat the process and put a fitting on the end of it.
That's correct.
And this is the fun of making AN lines, guys.
You push it all the way till the hose butts up against the end of the fittings. Yep. It's got a step to keep the hose from going past the threads. When you're building the fittings, you want to make sure that there's no gap here. You want to get them as close as possible. They do have a minimum tolerance, but I like to get it all the way down.
that's in there. So that's it. So that's our first line.
This is our first line.
First
for our
line of
fuel
many.
system.
Sweet.
All right, and here is the first length of hose, right where we want it. And as soon as we get our pump, this will be the suction side of our fuel system.
So in the meantime, since we have our line marked, we're gonna continue on with that -6. We have a big spool of it over here. And pretty much what we'll do is we'll just lay it down on the ground here. Andrew will hold that end. And we'll play tug of war.
Looking good.
All right, so we have a rough on our -6. It's gonna come right up over here, come right down through this little juncture right here, out this end, all the way down, and then we're right here to our fuel filter. So this is about where we need our length. So if you want to grab the blue tape, we'll mark this and cut it and put our ends on. We originally wanted to mount the fuel pump flat to the frame rail here, but these lines were not like matching up perfectly here, so we ended up flipping it, putting a little angle bracket. We'll end up bolting that in later, but for now we got our pump where we want it. So now we can start making our -6 line that we have kind of precariously perched over there. What are we going to use to hold the fuel line to the frame ring?
Zip ties, bubble gum, you know, all that. Popsicle sticks usually, and Elmer's glue. No, what we're gonna use is a P-clamp or a Dell clamp, and they are rubber lined and they will keep the hoses nice and safe.
We have our -8 on the suction side ran, have our ends, our fuel pump is mocked up, still have to bolt in this bracket here. And then what do we got for the rest of this lineup?
Out of the fuel pump into a -6 line, and we have our Dell clamps mocked up with our Cleco clips into the grommet to pass through the frame here.
The fuel filter is mounted in place, just got some Clecos there with our brackets, so we get a kind of idea of what we want to do. We have the header right here, so we kind of see the exhaust is going to come down. It's going to go right over this transmission cross member. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a 90 coming out of here, across the cross member, and come up the backside of the transmission and kind of hug this ridge right here, going right up to this first passenger side fuel rail. All right, so our passenger side fuel line is kind of mocked in there. I have the zip ties just holding it in place where like actual fasteners will go. So we're making our way up into the fuel rail. Now we have to make a line that links these two fuel rails together before we start running back in the other direction to do our return line.
Just for simplicity's sake, we're gonna just run a return style. So we'll just have a standard hose coming back out, feeding all the excess fuel that's not being used back into the tank.
We're finally at the home stretch on the fuel system for the F100. We made our link line here that connects the two fuel rails. And back here, as you can see, it's kind of mirroring each other. So this is gonna be our return line, right?
Correct.
All right, so this one is gonna run all the way back. We have it kind of mirrored this side. And when you're laying this stuff out, guys, it's good to do when you're at this stage of the build. You know, if you're having to build an exhaust system and build all these components, you don't want to do that first and then be like, oh, well, I wanted to run my fuel line a certain way. I want to run my brakes a certain way. Get all this stuff out of the way before you go to fab, because you can fab whatever you want. You can make whatever you want. You're not dictated by that at all. So make sure that you go ahead and do your due diligence to kind of outfit the chassis first. All right, so we're fabricating up some brackets for the hoses for the actual fuel lines on either side of the transmission. As you can see, this flexible line here is just kind of, I don't know, it'll probably be okay, but we're not really looking for okay. I took a 1-inch metal pipe, split it in half. This is gonna act like a saddle for the fuel line to like hold it in place and keep it as far away from that yoke as possible. The brackets that we made for the fuel lines are all set. Got them all welded up. They need a little fresh coat of paint, but you can see these are gonna have some nicer fasteners to hold the hose in place. But this just keeps everything tidy. Once the exhaust makes its way through here, I'm gonna make sure that this doesn't, rattle or go out of the way. This is gonna have a nice clamp on it. Everything's just gonna have a nice, tidy attachment. Up here, I have some tabs that I cut on the plasma table. I'm gonna go ahead and tap some holes to be able to put some loops right here, to be able to hold this guy here and right up there. So we'll have 4 attachment points on either side of the transmission that aren't being used for anything, so I'm using them for this bracketry. Right now the fuel system is pretty much where we want it. We're gonna go ahead and put the Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator in next.
We're putting it in the back just to keep the engine bay extremely clean.
Yeah. We
don't want to have any clutter or anything. Really just gonna have the engine look like a showpiece inside the bay.
Now, a fuel pressure regulator is pretty important to any sort of fuel system. You can't just hook up your fuel lines and plumb your engine and just let the fuel pump rip. This is the last stop on the train ride for the fuel system. After it's been eaten at the engine, there's still going to be some fuel left over. The injectors aren't going to take everything. So we have our return line here, fuel pressure regulator. So we're going to set it with our tuning once we have this thing on the dyno. But for right now, we're just going to have a return line that comes through here and just returns back into the corner of the gas tank. So we're going to make our last couple lines and get this all situated and finish this fuel system up.
We're going to be using rib nuts to install the Adele clamps for the fuel system onto the frame rails. The rib nuts are very similar to a standard style rivet where you install it onto the tool and it pulls the threads in and mushrooms out the rear to swedge it inside of your material.
We're going to rib nut all of our P-clamps on the frame rail. So all these areas where you see clecos holding in, we're gonna take this rib nut, we're gonna punch this hole open a little bit, and then put actual hardware in everywhere you see these P-clamps.
We have the fuel pressure regulator mounted all the way in the back of the truck here next to the fuel cell. The fuel system on the truck is deadheaded right here at the end of the fuel pressure regulator, and it has a single return coming out of the bottom that flows back into the fuel tank, and then it has a vacuum operated pressure regulator that's going to get a vacuum source from our intake manifold. So the last piece of the puzzle for the fuel system has been installed, which was the fuel pressure regulator. And all of our hard lines with our AN fittings are all plumbed and ready to go. We're gonna move on to the next stage of the build, which is
brakes. Next episode, we're gonna be putting the Willwoods on the truck. We're gonna be installing all of our final parts from powder coat and all of our nice painted parts as well. So come back next time, guys, because we're gonna continue on with the F100 truck, putting the whole chassis together and getting it completely finalized before we start wiring it up and try to get it running.